Welcome back to the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Glazier, and this is episode number 8. Today I decided to dig up an interview I did with engineer, producer, and drummer, Mr. John Cuniberti. His accolades are longer than I have time to explain, but his work with Joe Satriani alone has garnered him 5 gold albums and 1 platinum album award for their work on Surfing with the Alien. The bulk of this interview focuses on his One Microphone Minimalist series, where he records oftentimes an entire band with just one ribbon microphone. He explains how it works, the magic that can happen when an entire band records in one room, and also how the music business is still not benefiting the creators of the music as much as it should. Let's listen into that interview now. Is the way that you're doing it basically the way it was done from when they were cutting directly to like vinyl, or is there something completely different about the way you're doing it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, originally, when recordings were first being made, in fact, it was usually just one microphone. And the performers would stand around the microphone or on one side, depending on the mic, and get a balance in the room. Because, before the art of recording, people were playing live performances.
Uh-huh.
There was no world of audio recording. There was just a world of live performance. So
Sure.
People, performers were accustomed to and skilled at balancing themselves in a room together, performing and singing. Instruments were developed and designed just for that purpose. So even when you get into the later, like into the 30s, where big bands started performing together with horns and drums, one of the problems was that the acoustic guitars weren't loud enough. So, they had to develop a way to amplify a guitar. So,
Right.
The idea that a band would set up and balance themselves in a room for a live performance it was nothing new. What happened was that when the art of recording began, they just basically took that same scenario. They put up one mic, the band side, with the balances that they normally would, and it was recorded. Originally it was being recorded, direct to some sort of recording device. Typically, it would have been a vinyl of some sort. It would have been some sort of acetate would have been, recorded. So, but then when we got into multi-track recording, then more microphones would be used. And then we got into that whole world. It started with 2 tracks, and then 3 tracks, and then 4 tracks, and 8 tracks. And what are we up to now?
Limitless.
Well, it's literally, there's just no end to it. I mean, it could be hundreds and hundreds of tracks can be recorded and then manipulated after the fact, after the initial recording.
Sure.
And so the idea that a band would come into a studio and balance themselves in a room, not unlike maybe they do at a rehearsal or a nightclub.
Right.
That whole way of recording ended with the multi-track recording. I mean, a band would walk in, they'd throw mics on everything. Oftentimes they would, and still do, isolate everyone. And so they could have control over all the elements of the recording, right?
Yeah.
So, and what happened was that we gave something up. And what we gave up was the conversation that the musicians have among themselves in the room when they're listening to each other and responding to each other. It's a very different a way of recording that is, commonplace today.
Sure.
Now, that's not to say that there aren't folk acts and jazz acts and certainly bluegrass acts that get on a stage, stand around the microphone and play. I mean, that is that is still going on because that's because it works.
Right.
Because they're playing acoustic instruments, they're singing. It's all kind of been handed down over the centuries that this is how you balance yourself and how music is performed. In fact, the sound of that music is based on that premise that these people are going to just stand up and sing and play. Where when you get into the art of recording, all those rules go out the window, and we're making records. And making records is a very, very different occupation or process and result than a live performance. They can be both. I mean, you can do a live performance in a recording studio today and call it that. And there are people that do that or claim to do it. But, there is a safety net that is in place where if an individual in the band spoils a section or misses a beat or whatever, it can be repaired right there on the spot. We could do that with analog recording,
right?
Multi-track analog. We would just go back and punch in and fix the section, or we'd have the bass player come back, on Tuesday and redo his entire part. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. The digital age has just sort of made it more, made it easier, not only to get a lot of tracks recorded simultaneously, but it also gave us all the tools to repair and fix pretty much anything. But it came with a compromise. And the compromise is that now you have bands who may it may be their first recording. They may have very little recording experience. They come into a room now, and immediately the engineers start isolating everything and putting microphones on everything, and assuring the band if they make mistakes or they can't get through it, we can fix it. We can fix it later. So it produces a psychological effect in the room where, are people really at their best? Are people really bringing their A game? Are people really well rehearsed before they show up to the studio?
Right.
Well, I would argue that in many cases they're not. They're so accustomed to having their mediocre performances repaired that or handed over to somebody else to make them sound like they're competent. It's just become an entire way of making records. There's a whole generation of people that are in studios right now today who have never been in a room with their bandmates trying to balance themselves and listening to each other in this conversation.
Yeah.
And I use the word conversation because when you have two people talking to each other, if both people are talking and no one's listening, it's not going to be a very good conversation.
Right.
When people are willing to listen and react, then you have a lively conversation, and it usually produces a creative result.
Sure, you bet.
Well, if you're a guitar player, you're going in on Saturday to do all your guitar parts to a previously recorded track. No one on that track, no one else in the recording will be hearing you and reacting to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're going to be. It's your job now to listen to everybody else and react to them.
Wow.
And that produces a very different result than a band in a room balancing themselves and being forced to listen to each other and reacting to each other. And so the OneMic process that I'm developing in the modern world is a way to get back to the thing that we gave up. And so that's a very long, convoluted answer to your question, and I apologize.
No, it's actually really great because, I mean, it really brings up so many interesting things. Like, for me personally, I like one of my very favorite bands is the Allman Brothers. Watching, I forget what the Tom Dowd documentary was called, but that documentary they talk a lot, the band talks a lot about him coming in as the engineer and listening to each one of them while they're playing to hear what their sound is, and then going back and mixing that correctly. And I believe that they all recorded, but for the most part, all in one big room all together, all listening to each other, and having that conversation, like you said. And that comes up for a lot of the bands that I tend to listen to. That phrase comes up a lot, where the musicians are having a conversation. So for me, I mean, it's really exciting to hear you say that, and it kind of, it like clicks immediately that, yes, you're right. Everybody recording individually is not going to be having that one conversation. It's all little pieces patched together. So
yeah, I mean, there's a number of things happening. Yes, there is the taking responsibility for the balance of the band at the time of the recording. That's something that bands, that's an alien concept to a band.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because, I mean, even at a rehearsal, you're pretty much focused on your part, and you're not really paying all that much of attention to maybe what some of the other guys are doing if you're struggling or working out a part. You know, you're focused on your own part, and rightly so, because that's really kind of what part of a rehearsal is.
Sure.
A band doesn't go to a rehearsal and spend any time getting a balance in the room that sounds like a record. I mean, that just doesn't happen, because people are focused on their own performance and their own sound, and they know that's not what's required at the moment. What's required at the moment is to play together and to develop an arrangement. And, you know, they're going to listen to each other, and they're going to play off of each other like any live band would on a stage.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and in the 50s and in the 60s, when records were being made, they were essentially being made by live acts that took what they were doing on the road into a studio, and then someone just recorded that. Right. There wasn't really, you know, the idea that making a record would transcend a live performance. You know, the Beatles decided that playing live wasn't working for them anymore, and they wanted to go into the studio and experiment and create, you know, literally masterpieces that could not be even played live at the time on a stage.
Yeah, for sure.
And they took record making to a completely different place. And that inspired a complete genre and generation of music that, you know, transcended the live performance. They created sounds and balances and instrumentation that was unworldly. It wasn't something that you would actually ever experience in the natural world.
Sure.
Nowadays, with technology and such, you know, it's maybe a little bit more practical to take these really over-the-top productions and perform them live on a stage in front of 100,000 people. I mean, I think it's, you know, doable now.
Sure.
Where, of course, in the 50s and 60s, 70s, even right up into the 80s, it was very, very difficult to do.
That's very interesting. Huh. So when you're, I mean, that conversation just brought up a million questions, but I'll just stick to what I've got here first, and then maybe go back and touch on some of that. So with the one microphone sessions, and I think I already know the answer, but with that setup, you're basically going through the microphone and then into, there's one piece of equipment that you're sending it through. Is there any mastering or anything else that's going on, or is that basically what those guys sound like is what you're putting down on the track?
I'm using one stereo ribbon microphone, the AEA R88, and it goes to a microphone preamplifier.
Oh, the preamplifier.
All microphones need a preamplifier in the record chain. And I've chosen a Millennia HV3C, I believe it's called. I can get into the weeds and explain to you why I've chosen all of that if you really want to know. But the record chain is basically the one microphone into a microphone preamp, and then it's captured in high resolution digital. Now, you know, that recording is a stereo mix of the event in that room. That stereo recording is not unlike any stereo mix that one would end up with in a multi-track stereo mix-down recording. And it is a subject to mastering, just like you would any stereo mix.
So that's the one thing that really got me interested in that series was Ray had told me that you did all of your mixing with a measuring tape. And so when he said that, I was like, wow, that's really incredible that you have to set those up at certain distances to get that sound. So,
well, his answer is a little, it's not exactly what's going on there. The reason why I use a measuring tape is for panning mostly. Because the panning has to be done. If I want a guitar on the right and a guitar on the left, they have to be equal distances from the microphone. That's assuming that those guitar amplifiers are set at the exact same volume, which ideally I would want. If I want both those guitars to be at the same level, well, on a mixer, I would just move those faders up and down.
Sure.
If I want them to sound the same or similar, I don't want one real bright, one real dull. I want them to be similar.
Right.
Then I would, go out and adjust the guitar amplifier to get that sound, because I can't do it any other way. I can't do it in post-production. So I have come up with a formula of where guitar amplifiers and drums and bass and vocals need to be around this one microphone. And so I start off the sessions by laying it out using a tape measure.
Oh, I see.
Right. But ultimately I have to adjust the volumes of everything.
I had noticed in the Jackie Green video that there, and I'm sure this plays into it too, but there was like a blanket that you used to kind of muffle the bass to kick drum there. And I'm guessing also you have to kind of adjust depending on if one player maybe plays louder, even though the volumes are the same, or they're strumming or using their fingers versus using a pick. I'm sure that all plays into it.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the rooms that these recordings have been done in play a huge role in the effect, because, in a multi-track environment, the microphones are typically put pretty damn close to like the guitar amplifiers and or the singers.
Right.
And the drums. So you're basically eliminating the effect of the room in the recording. Depending on the room will have some, but it's fairly minimal.
Right.
And that comes back to a 70s style of recording, which was how this all got started, where you just close mic everything and then add delays and reverbs later to try to make it sound like they're all in the same room again.
Right.
Well, in my scenarios, I don't get to do that, or I don't have to do that, because the sound of the room is playing such a huge role in it. Now, the bad news is that depending on the design of the room will dictate how it's affecting the individual instruments and their volumes and their the frequencies that are being delivered to the microphone.
Sure.
A real dead room, a room that's absorbing a lot of high frequencies, is not particularly really friendly to an acoustic guitar that's 5 feet or 6 feet away. A room that's really uneven in the sense that one part of the room is real bassy and the other part of the room is really bright, noisy, and lively, that is not going to get you a balanced drum sound when the microphone is 8 feet away.
Right.
So there are, where in a closed mic scenario, that wouldn't be the case, because the microphones are only inches from the drums. So you're not really concerned about it.
Right.
So I learned early on in developing this process that the rooms I do these things in are critical and will determine how successful or successful at all of the recording. I mean, there are huge compromises I'm making in order to get the conversation, in order to record this band playing live in one take with everybody at their best, because they don't get to fix anything. So, I'm willing to give up some of the sonic qualities or perfections that we've learned to have, that we've developed and accepted over the multi-track process. And it's not for the faint of heart. If you're an engineer who is an absolute sonic perfectionist, this is not something you're going to want to indulge in.
Wow. So do you find, not to cut you off, but do you find that then some of those, the older rooms like Muscle Shoals and Sun Studio and Hallowed Halls, were those rooms more designed better for what you're doing versus like newer studios? Could you still pull it off? And I mean, obviously, I believe you could still pull it off in newer studios, but is the live vibe different in those newer recording studios?
Well, yes and no. At Muscle Shoals, it's a very dead, late 60s, 70s sounding room. In other words, that room was designed to kill all ambience, essentially, close mic everything, and then add reverbs and delays later to make it sound like everyone's in the room together. All those incredible records that came out of that building all have reverb on them. Yes, some of the microphones on the drums, like the overheads and stuff, are picking up a bit of the ambience of the drum booth. But that's not really what those records were about. They were really about the individual performers, the style of music, and the incredible songwriting and singing that was being done in those rooms. I mean, that's what those records are all about.
Sure.
And the room was basically, allowed them to have complete control over the recording after the fact. So for me, going in there was fairly straightforward because the room didn't produce any sort of nasty effect that I couldn't fix. So in that case, it was fairly tame because I could move the guitar amplifiers, the drums, and the performers around the microphone in that room pretty much any way I wanted without getting any sort of negative feedback, if you will, from the room.
Sure.
Now, Sun Studios in Memphis was a complete opposite of that. That room is very live. It has a tile floor. It has acoustic tile that is, less than an eighth of an inch thick on the walls, and it's a very, very live room. And so the recordings that I did at Sun Studio sound completely different than the recordings I did at Muscle Shoals for that fact. Now, I was okay with that because the records that came out of Sun Studio were recorded with 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 microphones at the most. And most of them were ribbon microphones that are bidirectional and really flooded those microphones with the sound of the room and the musicians in that room. So I knew that going in, and I was okay with that because I really wanted the sound of the room. I wanted that. I wanted the sound of the room. That's why I chose acts that I thought to perform in those rooms that would be, that would work. I wouldn't bring a metal band in there. I wouldn't bring, there's certain genres of music I wouldn't want that sort of overabundance of ambience in the recording. But with a band like Blu-ray, which has a bit of a old school retro sound, and certainly the Eskimo Brothers that are a rockabilly band.
Oh yeah, they were great.
hmm And then Cedric Burnside, who, plays acoustic guitar and sings the blues. That was where Muddy Waters made some of his historic records.
Right.
And just like that. I mean, they did it with a ribbon microphone mono to a tape recorder. I did it with a stereo ribbon microphone. I recorded it to digital. The process is the same. It's just that the equipment is different.
Right.
I did a modern recording, but I used the same approach.
Right. How did you come up? Were you aware of the bands that you had chosen, obviously, before? Or did you kind of put out the word and say, hey, I'm looking for these kind of players or these kind of people? Because I'd heard of, obviously like Jackie Green and then Boo Ray, but everybody else that you had recorded, I'm going out and buying their stuff now because it's such fantastic music and I had just not heard of it. Cedric Burnside I was kind of aware of, obviously, as well, but like the Dozens, the Imaginaries, some of those bands I hadn't heard of. So
right.
I'm going back out and grabbing up all their stuff because it's such fantastic music.
Well, the criteria that I use is I'm looking for incredible songwriters and singers. They have to be able to deliver a really wonderful, timeless song to me. So songwriting is probably number one. I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up listening to the greatest songwriters and singers of all time. So I'm very strict about, that criteria.
Uh-huh.
And they have to be able to perform live. So everyone I considered or vetted, I had to see some sort of live video of them on a stage performing. And it could be something, as simple as just a cell phone video taken at a club. I needed to know that they could get through an entire song well, and I needed to just see what they're like on camera, how people come off and how people look is important in a video medium. And, the OneMic recordings are 50% the audio and the other 50% is the video.
Right.
And they go hand in hand. I've never separated the two. I've always thought of them as one thing. I know a lot of people like to just listen to the audio, and that's fine, but I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it as bringing people into a room to witness this performance.
Right.
And this intimate performance of these artists in this room together, having this conversation. I'm inviting people in. It's why I only use one camera, because I want the perspective of one person in the room walking around a little bit during the performance to gather information about these human beings having this musical conversation in the room.
Uh-huh.
I didn't want a multi-camera, quick edit, fancy Hollywood style production, because it takes you away from that.
Sure.
Because I've grown up for the last 40 years in recording studios, I've had this humbling privilege of being in the room while these beautiful pieces of art were created. And it's a very intimate and special experience that only producers and recording engineers get. And what I wanted to do was share that with the world. I wanted to bring people into the studio and actually witness what I've witnessed over and over and over again. I mean, there's been so many times I've made recordings with bands in rooms where I said, "Oh my God, I wish I could have videotaped this."
Yeah.
Because what just happened was magic, and it's never going to happen again. And I want to share it with the world.
Right.
But it's not just an audio experience; it's a visual experience.
Uh-huh.
So getting back to my criteria, the vetting, They have to be able to perform live. They have to be able to project their image and their song and what it is they're doing visually. And they had to be willing and cooperative to do this.
Right.
I mean, you know, all of these acts have never done this before. So I'm really asking them to do things that they've never done before. When I would go and ask established recording artists who are on record labels if they want to do this, they were frightened off by the process. They're used to having this sort of control over everything after the fact, turning it over to the producer and their mastering engineers and their mix engineers, and you know, indulging in minutia for 6 months before they release the record.
Right.
You know, so most of them weren't interested. It was the young kids who had nothing to lose, who believed in themselves, who have made multi-track digital recordings, and after 6 months couldn't recognize them and hate them and don't even want to listen to them anymore.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, because the essence of what it was that got them in the room with these other people to make their music had been taken away from them. You know, they go into studios and then the stuff gets all recorded on multi-track, and then if some engineer comes in and manipulates the crap out of it and produces maybe their own vision of what this band is supposed to sound like.
Sure.
And basically stealing, you know, the essence of who the artist is, you know, in the process.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking and it's frustrating for the artist. So when I go to them and go, you get to control everything. You get to balance yourself. We get to actually see and hear what it is you do and why you do it. And that's an incredible gift to give to them. Yeah. But, you know, that all sounds great on paper. And that, you know, in my mind, I think that is really, like I say, a gift, a beautiful thing to give to somebody. But the fact is, it doesn't matter what I think.
Right.
You know, I mean, if I make those recordings and the artists hate them, and I just think they're really cool, then it's really at the end of the day for naught.
Right.
You know, but the fact is, every artist I've done this with has come back to me and told me that they absolutely love the result. Mm-hmm. And that is what has kept me doing it and continuing to try to refine the process. You know, if they didn't like it, I wouldn't do it.
Right.
But they all come back and they go, "Oh my God, this is so much better than, you know, the record we just did. We spent 6 months and $20,000 on."
Yeah, as an outside observer of all of this, the video and the audio and the people that you selected were really put together well, and it really does tell an amazing story. I am very appreciative of the work that you're doing, and I hope you continue to do it.
Right. Well, I always tell the artists, I go, look, I'm not suggesting that you make records this way, that this is the only way to do it. I just say this is just a different way of showing the world who you are and what you're doing in a very unique, intimate way. It's just another way of presenting your art to the world. It's not the only way. Of course, you're going to go back to a studio and make your album and multi-track it and do all that stuff. I mean, that's the modern way, and people expect to hear that result. And I'm not suggesting that they stop doing that. I'm just saying, you know, do this too. Right. This is just another way of doing it. I mean, MTV pioneered the idea of doing, you know, acoustic versions of rock records.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, by their Unplugged series. Uh-huh. And this is kind of in some ways it's similar. It's telling the artist, look, there's other ways you can perform these incredible songs.
Right.
You know, and it shows a different side to the song, and it shows a different it maybe presented in a more intimate fashion. But I could have done the opposite. I've taken bands, and I don't just do acoustic acts. I say, bring your electric guitars, bring your drums, bring your guitar amplifiers.
Right.
I want to try to make a record, a recording, and a video that sounds like a multi-track recording, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not, but it sounds like it.
Sure.
And that was the real challenge. And that, as a recording engineer, was what I wanted to prove to myself, and I wanted to prove to the world that it could be done.
Yeah, well, it definitely worked, and it sounded like I said, it was just an amazing recordings. I really love the way it came out.
Thank you.
I was over in earlier this year. I was over in Chicago for a book signing thing that was at Chess Records.
Yes.
And I spoke to Jacqueline, Willie Dixon's daughter, and she is actually in the process of trying to put together basically a recording studio again and to get people to come back in there.
Wow.
And so the book signing was upstairs, and they had a couple of players up there playing, which was, no mics. It was just, well, there were mics, but it was pretty much just into a amplifier, and it was just all live. And, they've got wood floors and tile up in there. So I was just kind of curious, are there other places like maybe Chess Records or other studios that you still would like to go and record at that you haven't done yet?
Oh, certainly. I mean, there are the iconic studios. Needless to say, there's a handful of them in Los Angeles. There is, of course, Abbey Road.
Oh, yes. I was going to ask about that also.
Sure, there's Avatar in New York. I mean, there are a whole, list of recording studios that I would like to do this in. Partly because it does really showcase the room, doesn't it? I mean, you're really going to hear the room, and the videos, of course, really, show the room. So, I'm killing a couple of birds with one stone. I mean, in a way, a lot of people might want to watch the videos because they get to go into these rooms and see these rooms in action. There's a lot of videos that are pouring out of Abbey Road. We've seen them all. They're all highly produced. They're all multi-camera. But you never really get the feel and the sense of what it was like when the Beatles were in the recording.
Right.
Because they've got all the high production values of theater lighting and fancy camera work going on.
Yeah.
But that's, trust me, you've seen the pictures of the Beatles in those rooms.
Oh, yes.
It looked like a warehouse thing.
Yeah.
Just shit everywhere. And that's the room. That's what it's like when you're actually making these records. I mean, that's what it really looks like. And so what they do is they go into these big, beautiful, iconic rooms and they turn them into theaters. And I always thought that was just kind of weird.
Yeah, I kind of have a slight glimpse into that because about 2 years ago, I went to see Rich Robinson up at Applehead in Woodstock. He did a 3-day recording session, and so I went in for 2 days. Somehow I ended up, my plane was delayed, so I was late. So really the only spot left for me to go to was in the control booth. And so for 2 days, I got to sit there in the control booth and kind of watch everything from that perspective. And it was really cool to be inside there, versus just out sitting watching them play. So it's really, really unique. So your camera work, obviously, the guy that you have doing that, it's really incredible. So
well, that's another thing that that was very difficult to accomplish because the videographer, the cinematographer, has to have skill at lighting, camera work, and he has to be a musician. he has to be able to be in the right place during the arrangements of the songs. I mean, he has to be able to move with the music and that. And quite honestly, it was very difficult to find somebody who really how to operate a camera on a Steadicam, light a room, and have intimate knowledge of the music.
Right.
So Nathaniel Cofield, who is the cinematographer on all my videos, he was skilled in all three things. And that is a very, very, very unique qualification.
Yes. That's what I always enjoy about watching people who, like you said, are musicians and know what they're doing, because, like on some of the recordings, one guy would take a solo and the camera would be there to capture it. And sometimes if you got somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, they just don't capture it the right way. But I play guitar, so I kind of, I'm always looking for those things like, oh, there's a little keys part. Why is the camera not on the guy doing the keys right now? Or there's a cool thing going on over here. Why is the camera not on that person? So, yeah.
Well, sure. It happens in the audio world. You've gone to concerts where the guitar player starts playing a guitar solo, you can't hear it, and then after 3 or 4 bars, it comes up. And that's because the guy that's mixing the show isn't a musician.
Right.
He doesn't understand that coming out of that second chorus, you're going to go to a solo. Right. He never took the time to learn the music.
Yeah.
In his defense, it may be a band he's never heard before. So, of course, how could he? But you should always have your finger on the soloist, fader, just in case, of course. Yeah.
So is there a plan, or can I petition for, are you going to be putting out any kind of like a vinyl set with the audio or some sort of a DVD package in the future? Or
if a record label came to me and wanted to issue a vinyl record of these recordings, I would be interested and cooperative.
Okay, good.
If somebody wanted to produce Blu-ray or DVDs of the entire or selected a handful of these videos, I would be interested in licensing that. My feeling is that the more people are exposed to it, the more it may inspire other people to do it.
I'm kind of always harping on that. Like when I talk to different people, like Boo-Ray, or I talked to, just the other day, I talked to Tim Nielsen from Driving and Crying. And I always tell those guys, because when you say you're a music fan, that can mean a lot of stuff. And so I always try to preface it with the stuff that I hear on the radio, I really don't enjoy that much. I really enjoy the guys playing their own music, live music. And that's why I do the blog that I do, and why I write the things I write, is because I really try to get people to listen to real music that's really being produced by actual people, instead of just throwing on some drum track and then they, sing over it and that's it. So if I can spread the word about the OneMic series and maybe, push it along so there's some more interest, or somehow find somebody that'll go, yes, that does need to be on vinyl, let's make that happen, then man, that would be like a dream come true for me. So,
well, I mean, a lot, to be honest, the signal path is what I would consider, reference quality, where it's a precision microphone into a precision microphone preamplifier.
Right.
And so the recording themselves, although I never went into it to try to make an audio file recording in the strictest sense, they are by nature that. They would be considered audiophile recordings because they are as pure as you possibly could ever do it.
Right.
So I think that there could be a market for it, and the fact that all the songs there's 40 of them now. There's almost 40 of these videos now.
Yeah.
And it's a fairly wide range of acts. In other words, everything from a rockabilly act to a jazz act. I mean, there's a pretty wide swath of genre of music involved here. In other words, there's something for everyone.
Yeah.
But I never went into this to make an audiophile recording. It's a byproduct, if you will, of my process. So if somebody wanted to cherry pick the recordings that were, more profound in the audio sense of a recording, and I know what they are because I'm intimately involved.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I could produce a 10-song audiophile disc that I think would be quite compelling to listen to.
Oh, without a doubt, I would love to see that happen. So I will be putting the word out for that everywhere I go.
Right.
Maybe more work for you, but I would love to see that come out on vinyl. That would be just fantastic. Do you, I know you've kind of posted some stuff online about artists, obviously not getting as much of the money as they should. And it kind of seems like it's always been that way, but do you see music eventually getting to the point, especially with social media and people being able to do a lot of stuff on their own where they don't really need some of those big shots, basically using these artists as their bank accounts, I guess?
Well, I see it as a double-edged sword here, and it's going to be this way for a while. The good news is that anybody can be a record company. Anybody can have worldwide distribution. I mean, even, 10 years ago, that was difficult. 20 years ago, it didn't exist at all. 30 years ago, nobody even dreamed of it, So a bunch of guys can get together and put together a garage band like I did in high school. And within a week have worldwide distribution. Somebody in Finland and somebody in Australia could actually be sitting down listening to this band's music.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty incredible statement,
Right.
To be able to do that. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the high-tech industry basically just followed the patterns of the old label industry. And, where they devalued the product to a point where they made it, they became in control of the cash flow. So, and that is continuing now. I mean, if you ask, like, who's making all the money, because we're talking billions of dollars.
Right.
More money was spent on music last year than ever before in the history of the world. So where's all these billions of dollars going?
Right.
Well, they're going to the middleman. They're going to where it's always gone to. But even a shitty record deal in the 80s is 100 times better than what people are receiving now for the same amount of popularity. And I don't want to get into the weeds with all the numbers. There's other people that do it a lot better than I do,
Sure.
and all that data is out there. But what's going to have to happen is that the providers, the distributors, are going to ultimately have to cut deals with the artists directly, who actually are the creators, and we're going to have to, get rid of the middlemen. right now, record companies are taking as much from their artists as they did back in the day when they had to produce vinyl albums, give them tour support, and handle 100% of their publicity, which probably included $1 million video.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Now they're taking the same amount of money and they're doing buckets. They're doing nothing. What do they? What do they do? What does Pandora actually do?
Yeah.
What does Spotify actually do?
Right. They don't do anything.
They're distributors. They're not. How are they helping you? Okay, so you've got some people high up who know people who can persuade someone at Spotify to put your song in their playlist. Well, that back in the day we used to call payola. Now they call it something else, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Major labels have influence over the Spotify playlist, and if you're on that playlist as an artist, you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. If you're not on that playlist, you're not.
Right.
People are listening to your music, but you're not receiving a dime from it.
Yeah.
Or you're receiving a dime from it, literally.
Right. Yes. That's
so. The whole thing is effed up and corrupted. Yeah. And it's because the high-tech industry followed the old model of the record label. Now, eventually, the recording artists are going to get very savvy, and they're going to start saying, I don't need Universal Records anymore. I'm going to go right to Spotify and cut a recording contract with them. And when Spotify and the other distributors start doing that, it's going to be a lot better for the recording artist.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it's incredible that, the recording artists spend all this time to produce this product, which is a beautiful album that they pour their heart and soul into, and then they just get...
That aspect will never change.
Right.
That will always be the case because trends, popularity, the fickle taste of the public will always produce that result. There will always be people making great records that we all think are amazing that nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to pay for, right. and will go into obscurity. Yeah. It's a very subjective discussion that we can have for 3 days.
Yeah.
I think that, but the thing, what I was mentioning in I think a Facebook thing that I had mentioned was that the artists that are popular, they're the ones that are getting screwed. The ones that do have millions and millions and millions of people listening to their music, they're getting nothing for it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a huge problem because, and it's basically thievery, and it's just incredibly unfair. And it doesn't help produce more art.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't encourage more art. If people can't pay their bills, how can they develop their art? Some do. Some people are so incredibly talented that they can make it happen. Mm-hmm. It's just the way the money is being distributed right now is unequitable. And that needs to change. But there's always going to be the super talented ones that are going to be making boatloads of money, and people who are less talented that won't make as much because people don't want to hear their music. People aren't interested in their music. So when people that are marginally talented are bitching and moaning about how terrible the music business is, you can't ignore the fact that maybe they're just not as talented as Michael Jackson.
Right. And that's one thing that I think I mentioned that I also do record reviews for Ink19.com. And so a lot of times when I pick somebody that I want to, well, most times when I pick somebody that I want to review or I find something that's interesting, they send me a digital download or something like that. So I technically already have the file, but after I listen to it, I will go to their website and purchase the vinyl album or the CD or whatever it is, because, I mean, technically I already have it. I don't need to pay for it, but I want to support those bands. So, I always go to their website. I buy the copy or I pre-order it just so that I can help support that good music. And then I try to put in my reviews how good they are and why people need to listen to them. So,
sure. Yeah. If you enjoy someone's art and there's an opportunity for you to support them in any small way, I think really you're kind of in a way obligated to do that. Well, I get in all the time, and they always put me on the guest list, and it's like, no, I'll pay the $10 to get in.
Right.
I mean, if you're not worth $10,
right.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be here anyway.
I actually just saw a couple days ago a band called the Greyhounds out of Texas, and I had ordered an album. It didn't arrive in time, so I bought 2 more at the show. And then I'll give somebody my other album just so that I can help spread the word. So I think it's kind of my obligation, like you're saying, to really, if I like those bands, I really need to support them and help push their music along. So
yeah, I agree.
That's great.
I want to once again thank Mr. John Cuniberti for not only spending an hour of his time on the phone with me, but also allowing me to release the audio and share the wealth of information and knowledge that he explained during the interview. Please go check out the OneMic series on YouTube to experience not only the fascinating way in which he records these artists, the historic venues where their performances take place, but also the artists themselves. As I said during this interview, I've discovered a number of incredible talents through this series. I have to also thank musician and recording engineer Calvin Strapp for getting this roughly recorded audio to a usable level. I have to thank both of my sponsors, Pure Mountain Coffee and Black Cat Bone Productions, for their continued support. And note that I have a number of interesting interviews on the way, so please stay tuned and I'll catch up with you all down the road.